Alright, folks, welcome back to Paper Cuts. Last we left off, we were told of the shocking revelation that Dorian Gray was engaged to be married to Sybil Vane. And, let's pick right back up into it with Chapter 5. Mother, I'm so happy, whispered the girl, burying her face in the lap of the faded, tired-looking woman who, with back turned to the shrill, intrusive light, was sitting in the one armchair that their dingy sitting-room contained. "I'm so happy, and you must be happy, too." Miss Vane winced and put her thin, bismuth-whitened hands on her daughter's head. "Happy?" she echoed. I'm only happy, Sybil, when I see you act. You mustn't think of anything but your acting. Mr. Isaacs has been very good to us, and we owe him money." The girl looked up and pouted. "Money, Mother? What does money matter? Love is more than money." "Mr. Isaacs has advanced us £50 to pay off our debts and get a proper outfit for James. You mustn't forget that, Sybil. £50 is a very large sum. Mr. Isaacs has been most considerate." "He's not a gentleman, Mother, and I hate the way he talks to me," said the girl, rising to her feet and going over to the window. "I don't know how we could manage without him," answered the elder woman querulously. Sybil Vane tossed her head and laughed. "We don't want him any more, Mother. Prince Charming rules life for us now." And then she paused. A rose shook in her blood and shadowed her cheeks. Quick breath parted the petals of her lips, and they trembled. Some southern wind of passion swept over her, and stirred the dainty folds of her dress. "I love him," she said simply. Foolish child, was the parrot phrase flung in answer. The waving of crooked, false-jeweled fingers gave grotesqueness to the words. The girl laughed again. The joy of a caged bird was in her voice. Her eyes caught the melody and echoed it in radiance, and then closed for a moment, as though to hide their secret, and when they opened, the mist of a dream had passed over them. Thin-lipped wisdom spoke at her from the worn chair, hinted at prudence, quoted from that book of cowardice whose author apes the name of the common sense. But she didn't listen. She was free in her prison of passion. Her Prince Charming, was with her. She had called on memory to remake him. She had sent her soul to search for him, and it had brought him back. His kiss burned again upon her mouth, and her eyelids were warm with his breath. Then wisdom altered its method and spoke of espial and delivery. This young man might be rich. If so, marriage should be thought of. Against the shell of her ear broke the waves of worldly cunning. The arrows of craft shot by her. She saw the thin lips moving and smiled, and suddenly she felt the need to speak. The wordy silence troubled her. Mother, why does he love me so much? I know I love him. I love him because he is what love himself should be, but what does he see in me? I'm not worthy of him, and yet why, I cannot tell. Though I feel so much beneath him, I don't feel humble. I feel proud, terribly proud. Mother, did you love Father as I love Prince Charming?" And the elder woman grew pale beneath the coarse powder that daubed her cheeks, and her dry lips twitched with a spasm of pain. Sybil rushed to her, flung her arms around her neck, and kissed her. "Forgive me, Mother. I know it pains you to talk about our father. But it only pains you because you loved him so much. Don't look so sad. I'm as happy today as you were 20 years ago. Oh, let me be happy forever." "My child, you are far too young to think of falling in love. Besides, what do you know of this young man? You don't even know his name. The whole thing's most inconvenient, and really, when James is going away to Australia... Well, I have so much to think of, and I must say that you've shown much more consideration. However, as I said before, if he's rich..." "Oh, Mother, just let me be happy." At this, Miss Vane glanced at her, and with one of those false theatrical gestures that so often became a mode of second nature to a stage player, clasped her in her arms. And at this moment the door opened, and a young lad with rough brown hair came into the room. He was thick-set of figure, and his hands and feet were large and somewhat clumsy in movement. He was not so finely bred as his sister. One would hardly have guessed the close relationship that existed between them. Miss Vane fixed her eyes on him, and intensified her smile. She mentally elevated her son to the dignity of an audience, and she felt sure that the tableau was interesting.
You might keep some of your kisses for me, Sybil, I think,
said the lad with a good-natured grumble. But you don't like being kissed, Jim. You're a dreadful old bear. And she ran across the room and hugged him. James Vane looked into his sister's face with a tenderness.
I want you to come out with me for a walk, Sybil. I don't suppose I'll ever see this horrid London again. I'm sure I don't want to.
My son, don't say such dreadful things,
murmured Miss Vane, picking up a tawdry theatrical dress with a sigh and beginning to patch it. She felt a little disappointed that he had not joined the group. It would have increased the theatrical picturesqueness of the situation.
Why not, Mother? I mean it.
You pain me, son. I trust you'll return from Australia in a position of affluence. I believe there's no society of any kind in the colonies, nothing that I would call society. So when you've made your fortune, you must come back and assert yourself in London.
Society? I don't want to know anything about that. I should like to make some money and to take you and Sybil off the stage. I hate it.
Oh, Jim, how unkind of you. But are you really going for a walk with me? That'll be nice. I was afraid you were going to say goodbye to some of your friends, to Tom Hardy, who gave you that hideous pipe, or Ned Langton, who makes fun of you for smoking it. It's very sweet of you to let me have your last afternoon. Where shall we go? Let us go to the park.
I'm too shabby. Only swell people go to the park.
Nonsense, Jim, she whispered, stroking the sleeve of his coat, and he hesitated for a moment.
Very well, but don't be too long dressing,
he said at last, and she danced out of the door. One could hear her singing as she ran upstairs, and her little feet pattered overhead. He walked up and down the room 2 or 3 times, and then he turned to the still figure in the chair.
Mother, are my things ready?
Quite ready, James,
she answered, keeping her eyes on her work. For some months past she had felt ill at ease when she was alone with this rough, stern son of hers. Her shallow, secret nature was troubled when their eyes met, and she used to wonder if he suspected anything. The silence, for he made no other observation, became intolerable to her. She began to complain. Women defend themselves by attacking, just as they attack by sudden and strange surrenders.
I hope you'll be contented, James, with your seafaring life. You must remember that it's your own choice. You might have entered a solicitor's office. Solicitors are a very respectable class, and in the country often dine with the best families.
I hate offices and I hate clerks. But you're quite right. I've chosen my own life. All I say is watch over Sybil. Don't let her come to any harm. Mother, you must watch over
her. James, you really talk very strangely. Of course I watch over Sybil.
I hear a gentleman comes every night to the theatre and goes behind to talk to her. Is that right? What about that?
You're speaking about things you don't understand, James. In this profession we're accustomed to receive a great deal of most gratifying attention. I myself used to receive a great deal of the most many bouquets at one time. That was when acting was really understood. As for Sybil, I don't know at present whether her attachment is serious or not, but there's no doubt that the young man in question is a perfect gentleman. He's always most polite to me. Besides, he has the appearance of being rich, and the flowers he sends are lovely.
You don't know his name, though?
No,
answered his mother with a placid expression in her face.
He's not quite yet revealed his real name. I think it's quite romantic of him. He's probably a member of the aristocracy.
Watch over Sybil, Mother. Watch over her.
My son, you distress me very much. Sybil's always under my special care. Of course, if this gentleman's wealthy, there's no reason why he should not contract an alliance with him. I trust it's one of the aristocracy. He's got the appearance of it, I must say. Might make a most brilliant marriage for Sybil. They'd make quite a charming couple. His good looks are really remarkable. Everybody notices them.
The lad muttered something to himself and drummed on the window-pane with his coarse fingers. He'd just turned round to say something when the door opened and Sybil ran in. How serious you both are. What's the matter?
Nothing. I suppose one must be serious sometimes. Goodbye, Mother. I'll have my dinner at 5 o'clock. Everything's packed except for my shirts, so you needn't trouble.
Goodbye, my son.
she answered with a bow of strained stateliness. She was extremely annoyed at the tone he had adopted with her. There was something in his look that made her feel afraid. Kiss me, mother, said the girl, and her flower-like lips touched the withered cheek and warmed its frost.
My child,
cried Miss Vane, looking up to the ceiling in search of an imaginary gallery.
Come on, Sybil,
said her brother impatiently. He hated his mother's affectations. They went out into the flickering, wind-blown sunlight and strolled down the dreary Easton Road. The passers-by glanced in wonder at the sullen, heavy youth who, in coarse, ill-fitting clothes, was in the company of such a graceful, refined-looking girl. He was like a common gardener walking with a rose. Jim frowned from time to time when he caught the inquisitive glance of some stranger. He had that dislike of being stared at which comes on geniuses late in life and never leaves the commonplace. Sybil, however, was quite unconscious of the effect she was producing. Her love was trembling and laughter on her lips. She was thinking of her Prince Charming, and that she might think on him all the more, she didn't talk of him, but prattled on about the ship in which Jim was going to sail, about the gold he was certain to find, about the wonderful heiress whose life he was to save from the wicked red-shirted bushrangers. For he was not to remain a sailor or a supercargo or whatever he was going to be. Oh, no, a sailor's horrid existence was dreadful. Fancy being cooped up in a ship with a hoarse, humpbacked waves trying to get in, and a black wind blowing the masts down and tearing the sails in long, screaming ribbons. He was to leave the vessel in Melbourne, bid a polite good-bye to the captain, and go off at once to the goldfields. Before a week was over, he was to come across the largest nugget of pure gold, the largest nugget that had ever been discovered, and bring it down to the coast, in a wagon guarded by 6 mounted policemen. The bushrangers were to attack them 3 times, and he defeated them with an immense slaughter. Oh no, he wasn't to go to the goldfields at all. They were terrible places, where men got intoxicated, and shot each other in bar-rooms, and used bad language. He was to be a nice sheep farmer, and one evening, as he was riding home, he was to see the beautiful heiress being carried off by a robber on a black horse, and give chase and rescue her. Of course she'd fall in love with him, and he with her, and they would get married and come home and live in an immense house in London. Yes, there were delightful things in store for him, but he must be very good and not lose his temper or spend his money foolishly. She was only a year older than he was, but she knew so much more of life. He must be sure also to write to her by mail and say his prayers every night before he went to sleep. God was very good and would watch over him. She would pray for him too, and in a few years he'd come back quite rich and happy. The lad listened sulkily to her and made no answer. He was heart-sick at leaving home. And yet it wasn't this alone that made him gloomy and morose. Inexperienced though he was, he had a strong sense of the danger of Sybil's position. The young dandy who was making love to her could mean her no good. He was a gentleman, and he hated him for that, hated him through some curious race instinct for which he couldn't account, and which for that reason was all the more dominant within him. He was conscious also of the shallowness and vanity of his mother's nature, and in that infinite peril for Sybil and Sybil's happiness. Children begin by loving their parents. As they grow older they judge them, and sometimes they forgive them. His mother! He had something on his mind to ask of her, something that he'd brooded on for many months of silence. A chance phrase that he'd heard at the theatre, a whispered sneer that had reached his ears one night as he waited at the stage door, had set loose a train of terrible thoughts. He remembered it as if it was the lash of a hunting crop across his face. His brows knit together in a wedge-like furrow, and with a twitch of pain he bit his underlip. "You're not listening to a word I'm saying, Jim, and I'm making the most delightful plans for your future. Do say something."
What do you want me to say?
"Oh, that you'll be a good boy and not forget us."
He shrugged at this. You're more likely to forget me than I am to forget you, Sybil.
"What do you mean, Jim?"
You have a new friend, I hear. Who is he? Why have you not told me about him? He means you no good."
"Oh, stop, Jim. You mustn't say anything against him. I love him."
"Why, you didn't even know his name. Who is he? I have a right to know."
"He's called Prince Charming. Don't you like the name? Oh, you silly boy. You should never forget it. If only you saw him, you'd think him the most wonderful person in the world. Some day you'll meet him when you come back from Australia. You'll like him so much. Everybody likes him, and I love him." I wish you could come to the theatre tonight. He's going to be there, and I'm to play Juliet. Oh, how I shall play it! Fancy Jim to be in love and play Juliet. I shall have him sitting there to play for his delight. I'm afraid I may frighten the company, frighten or enthrall them. To be in love is to surpass oneself. Poor dreadful Mr. Isaacs will be shouting genius and his loafers at the bar. He's preached me as a dogma. Tonight he'll announce me as a revelation. I feel it. And it's all his only, Prince Charming, my wonderful lover, God of graces. But I'm poor beside him. Poor? What does that matter? Oh, when poverty creeps in at the door, love flies in through the window. Our proverbs want rewriting. They were made in winter, and it's summer now, springtime for me, I think, a very dance of blossoms in blue skies.
He's a gentleman?
A prince. What more do you want?
He wants to enslave you.
I shudder at the thought of being free.
I want you to beware of him.
To see him is to worship him, to know him is to trust him.
Sybil, you're mad about him.
She laughed and took his arm. You dear old Jim, you talk as if you were 100. Some day you'll be in love yourself, and then you'll know what it is. Don't look so sulky. Surely you'll be glad to think that, though you're going away, you'll leave me happier than I ever have been before. Life has been hard for us both, terribly hard and difficult. But it'll be different now. You're going to a new world, and I've found one. Here are 2 chairs. Let us sit down and see the smart people go by. And they took their seats amongst a crowd of washers. The tulip beds across the road flamed like throbbing rings of fire. A white dust, a tremulous cloud of orris root, it seemed, hung in the painting air. The brightly colored parasols danced and dipped like monstrous butterflies. She made her brother talk of himself, his hopes, his prospects. He spoke slowly and with effort. They passed words to each other as players at a game pass counters. Sybil felt oppressed. She couldn't communicate her joy. A faint smile curving that sullen mouth was all the echo she could win, and after some time she became silent. Suddenly she caught a glimpse of golden hair and laughing lips, and an open carriage with 2 ladies, Dorian Gray, drove past. There he is.
Who?
Prince Charming. He jumped up and seized her roughly by the arm.
Show him to me. Which one is he? Point him out. I must see him,
he exclaimed, but at that moment the Duke of Berwick's four-in hand came between, and when it had left the space clear, the carriage had swept out of the park. He's gone. I wish you'd seen him.
I wish I had, for as sure as there is a God in heaven, if he ever does you any wrong, I'll kill him.
She looked at him in horror, and he repeated his words. They cut the air like a dagger. The people round began to gape, and a lady standing close to her tittered. Come away, Jim, come away, she whispered, and he followed her doggedly as she passed through the crowd. He felt glad at what he'd said. And when they had reached the Achilles statue, she turned round. There was pity in her eyes that became laughter on her lips, and she shook her head at him. You're foolish, Jim, utterly foolish, a bad-tempered boy, that's all. How can you say such utter foolishness? How can you say such terrible things? You don't know what you're talking about. You're simply jealous and unkind. Oh, I wish you'd fall into love. Oh, love makes people good, and what you said was wicked.
I'm 16, and I know what I'm about. Mother's no help to you. She doesn't understand how to look after you. I wish now that I wasn't going to Australia at all. I had a great mind to chuck the whole thing up, and I would if my articles hadn't been signed.
Oh, don't be so serious, Jim. You're like one of the heroes of those silly melodramas Mother used to be so fond of acting in. I'm not going to quarrel with you. I've seen him, and to see him is perfect. Happiness. We won't quarrel. I know you'd never harm anyone I love, would you?
Not as long as you love him, I suppose.
I shall love him forever.
And him?
Forever, too.
He'd better.
She shrank from him, then laughed, and put her hand on his arm. He was merely a boy. At the Marble Arch, they hailed an omnibus, which left them close to their shabby home in the Euston Road. It was after 5 o'clock, and Sybil had to lie down for a couple of hours before acting. Jim insisted she should do so. He said that he would sooner part with her when their mother was not present. she would be sure to make a scene, and he detested scenes of every kind. In Sybil's own room they parted. There was jealousy in the lad's heart, and a fierce, murderous hatred of the stranger who, as it seemed to him, had come between them. And yet when her arms were flung about his neck, and her fingers strayed through his hair, he softened, and kissed her with real affection. There were tears in his eyes as he went downstairs. His mother was waiting for him below. She grumbled at his unpunctuality as he entered, and he made no answer but sat down to his meagre meal. The flies buzzed around the table and crawled over the stained cloth. Through the rumble of omnibuses and the clatter of street cabs he could hear the droning voice devouring every minute that was left to him. And after some time he thrust away his plate and put his head in his hands. He felt that he had a right to know. It should have been told to him before, if it was as he expected. Leaden with fear, his mother watched him. Words dropped mechanically from her lips. A tattered lace handkerchief twitched in her fingers. When the clock struck 6, he got up and went to the door. And then he turned back and looked at her, and their eyes met. In hers he saw a wild appeal for mercy, and it enraged him.
"Mother, I have something to ask you."
Her eyes wandered vaguely about the room, and she made no answer.
"Tell me the truth. I have a right to know. Were you married to my father?"
She heaved a deep sigh, and it was a sigh of relief. The terrible moment, the moment that night and day for weeks and months she had dreaded, had come at last, and yet she felt no terror. Indeed, in some measure it was a disappointment to her. The vulgar directness of the question called for a direct answer, and the situation had not been gradually led up to. It was crude. It reminded her of a bad rehearsal. "No," she answered, wondering at the harsh simplicity of life.
"My father was a scoundrel, then?"
cried the lad, clenching his fist, and she shook her head. "I knew he was not free. We loved each other very much. If he had lived, he would have made provision for us. Don't speak against him, my son. He was your father and a gentleman. Indeed, he was highly connected." And an oath broke from his lips.
"I don't care for myself. But don't let Sybil... Is it a gentleman, isn't it? Who's in love with her, or says he is. Highly connected too, I suppose."
For a moment a hideous sense of humiliation came over the woman, and her head drooped. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands.
Sybil
has a mother. I had none," she murmured, and the lad was touched. He went towards her, and stooping down, kissed her.
"I'm sorry if I've pained you by asking about my father, but I couldn't help it. I must go now. Goodbye. Don't forget that you'll have only one child to look after. And believe me that if this man wrongs my sister, I'll find out who he is, track him down, and kill him like the dog he is. I swear it."
The exaggerated folly of the threat, the passionate gesture that accompanied it, the mad melodramatic words which made life, it made it seem all that more vivid to her. She was familiar with the atmosphere. She breathed more freely, and for the first time for many months she really admired her son. She would have liked to have continued the scene on the same emotional scale, but he cut her short. Trunks had to be carried down, and mufflers looked out for. The lodging house drudge bustled in and out. There was bargaining with the cabman. The moment was lost in vulgar details. It was with a renewed feeling of disappointment that she waved the tattered lace handkerchief from the window as her son drove away. She was conscious that a great opportunity had been wasted, and she consoled herself by telling Sybil how desolate she felt her life could be, now that she only had one child to look after. She remembered the phrase. It had pleased her. Of the threat she said nothing. It was vividly and dramatically expressed. She felt that they would all laugh at it some day. Chapter 6. "I suppose that you've heard the news, Basil," said Lord Henry that evening, as Hallward was shown into a little private room at the Bristol, where dinner had been laid for 3.
"No, Harry," answered the artist, giving his hat and coat to the bowing waiter. "What is it? Nothing about politics, I hope. They don't interest me."
There's hardly a single person in the House of Commons worth painting, though many of them would be better for a little whitewashing.
Dorian Gray is engaged to be married. Hallward stopped, and then started, and then frowned.
Dorian engaged to be married? Impossible.
It's perfectly true.
To whom?
To some little actress or another.
I can't believe it. Dorian's far too sensible.
Dorian's far too wise to not do foolish things now and again, Basil.
Marriage is hardly a thing that one can do now and then, Harry.
Except in America. But I didn't say he was married. I said he was engaged to be married. There's a great difference, you see. I have a distinct remembrance of being married, but I have no recollection of all at being engaged. I'm inclined to think that I never was engaged.
But think of Dorian's birth and position and wealth. It'd be absurd for him to marry so much beneath him.
If you want to make him marry this girl, tell him that, Basil. He's sure to do it then. Whenever a man does a thoroughly stupid thing, it's always from the noblest motives.
I hope the girl's good, Harry. I don't want to see Dorian tied to some vile creature who might degrade his nature and ruin his intellect.
Oh, she's better than good. She's beautiful, murmured Lord Henry, sipping a glass of vermouth and orange bitters. Dorian says she's beautiful. He's not often wrong about things of that kind. Your portrait of him has quickened his appreciation of the personal appearance of other people. It has had that excellent effect, amongst others. We are to see her tonight, if that boy doesn't forget his appointment.
Are you serious?
Quite serious, Basil. I should be miserable if I thought I shall ever be more serious than I am at the present moment.
But do you approve of it, Harry? Asked the painter, walking up and down the room and biting his lip. You can't approve of it, possibly. It's some silly infatuation.
I never approve or disapprove of anything now. It's such an absurd attitude to take towards life. We're not sent into the world to stare our moral prejudices. I never take any notice of what common people say, and I never interfere with what charming people do. If a person's personality fascinates me, whatever mode of expression that personality selects is absolutely delightful to me. Dorian Gray falls in love with a beautiful girl who acts Juliet, and proposes to marry him, or marry her. Why not? If he wedded Messalina, he'd be none the less interesting. You know I'm not a champion of the marriage. The real drawback to marriage is that it makes one unselfish. And unselfish people are colourless. They lack individuality. And still there are certain temperaments that marriage seems to make more complex. They retain their egotism and add it to many other egos. They're forced to have more than one life. They became highly organized, and to be highly organized is, I should fancy, the object of man's existence. Besides, every experience is of value, and whatever one may say against marriage, it certainly is an experience. I hope that Dorian Gray will make this girl his wife, passionately adore her for 6 months, and then suddenly become fascinated by someone else. He would be a wonderful study.
You don't mean a single word of all that, do you, Harry? You know you don't. If Dorian Gray's life were spoiled, well, no one would be sorrier than yourself. You're much better than you pretend to be.
Lord Henry laughed. The reason we all like to think so well of others is that we are afraid of ourselves. So well of others is that we are afraid of ourselves. The basis of optimism is sheer terror. When we think that we are generous because we credit our neighbour with the possession of those virtues that are likely to be a benefit to us, we praise the banker that he may overdraw our account and find good qualities in the highwayman, in the hope that he may spare our pockets. I mean everything that I have said. I have the greatest contempt for optimism. As for a spoiled life, no life is spoiled, but one whose growth is arrested. If you want to mar a nature, you simply have to merely reform it. As for marriage, of course that would be silly, but there are other and more interesting bonds between men and women. I'll certainly encourage those. They have the charm of being fashionable. But here's Dorian himself. He'll tell you more than I can. My dear Harry, my dear Basil, you must both congratulate me," said the lad, throwing off his evening cape with its satin-lined wings and shaking each of his friends by the hand in turn. "I've never been so happy. Of course, it's sudden, all really delightful things are. Oh, and yet it seems to me to be the one thing I've been looking for all my life." He was flushed with excitement and pleasure, and looked extraordinarily handsome. "I hope you'll always be very happy, Dorian, but I don't quite forgive you for not having let me know of your engagement. You let Harry know."
"And I don't forgive you for being late for dinner,"
broke in Lord Henry, putting his hand on the lad's shoulder and smiling as he spoke. "Come, let us sit down and try what the new chef here is like, and then you'll tell us how it all came about."
"There's really not much to tell,"
cried Dorian as they took their seats at the small round table. "What happened was simply this. After I left you yesterday evening, Harry, I dressed, had some dinner at that little Italian restaurant in Rupert Street you introduced me to, and went down at 8 o'clock to the theatre. Sybil was playing Rosalind. Of course the scenery was dreadful and the Orlando absurd. But Sybil, you should have seen her. When she came on in her boy's clothes, she was perfectly wonderful. She wore a moss-coloured velvet jerkin with cinnamon sleeves, slim, brown, cross-gartered hose, a dainty little green cap with a hawk's feather, caught in a jewel, and a hooded cloak lined with dull red. She'd never seemed to me more exquisite. She had all the delicate grace of that Tangara figurine you have in your studio, Basil. Her hair clustered around her face like dark leaves round a pale rose. As for her acting, well, you shall see it tonight. She's simply a born artist. I sat in a dingy box absolutely enthralled. I forgot that I was in London in the 19th century. I was away with my love in the forest that no man had ever seen, and after the performance was over I went behind and spoke to her. As we were sitting together, suddenly there came into her eyes a look that I'd never seen there before. My lips moved toward hers and we kissed each other. I can't describe to you what I felt at that moment. It seemed to me that all my life had been narrowed to one perfect point of rose-colored joy. She trembled all over and shook like a white narcissus. Then she flung herself on her knees and kissed my hands. I feel I shouldn't tell you all this, but I can't help it. Of course, our engagement is a dead secret. She hasn't even told her own mother. I don't know what my guardians will say. Lord Radley is sure to be furious. I don't care. I shall be of age in less than a year, and then I can do what I like. I've been right, Basil, haven't I, to take out my love of poetry and find my wife in Shakespeare's plays? Lips that Shakespeare taught to speak have whispered their secret in my ear. I've had the arms of Rosalind around me and kissed Juliet on the mouth.
"Well, yes, Dorian, I suppose you were right."
"Have you seen her today?"
"No, I left her in the forest of Arden. I shall find her in an orchard in Verona."
Lord Henry sipped his champagne in a meditative manner.
"At what particular point did you mention the word marriage, Dorian? And what did she say in answer? Perhaps you forget all about it."
"My dear Harry, I didn't treat it as a business transaction. I didn't make any formal proposal. I told her that I loved her, and she said she was not worthy to be my wife. Not worthy? Why, the whole world is nothing to me compared with her."
"Women are so wonderfully practical, much more practical than we are. In situations of that kind, we often forget to say anything about marriage, and they always remind us."
Hallward laid his hand upon his arm.
"Don't, Harry."
This is not Harry speaking.
"Don't, Harry. You've annoyed Dorian. He's not like other men. He'd never bring misery upon anyone. His nature's too fine for that."
"Dorian's never annoyed with me,"
he answered, looking across the table.
"I asked the question for the best reason possible, for the only reason, indeed, that excuses one for asking any question. Simple curiosity. I have a theory that it's always the women who propose to us, and not we who propose to the women, except, of course, in middle-class life. But then the middle classes aren't modern."
Dorian Gray laughed along with Henry and tossed his head.
"No, you're quite incorrigible, Harry, but I don't mind. It's impossible to be angry with you. When you see Sybil Vane, you'll feel that the man who could wrong her would be a beast without a heart.
I cannot understand how anyone could wish to shame the thing he loves. I love Sybil Vane. I want to place her on a pedestal of gold and see the world worship the woman who is mine. What's marriage? Irrevocable vow. You mock it for that. Oh, don't mock. It's an irrevocable vow that I want to take. Her trust makes me faithful. Her belief makes me good. When I am with her, I regret all that you've taught me. I become different from what you've known me to be. I'm changed, and the mere touch of Sybil Vane's hand makes me forget you and all your wrong, fascinating, poisonous, delightful theories.
And those are?
Asked Lord Henry, helping himself to some salad. Oh, your theories about life, your theories about love, your theories about pleasure, all your theories, in fact, Harry.
Pleasure's the only thing worth having a theory about. But I'm afraid I cannot claim my theory as my own. It belongs to nature, not to me. Pleasure's nature's test, her sign of approval. When we're happy, we're always good, but when we're good, we're not always happy.
No, but what do you mean by good? Yes, echoed Dorian, leaning back in his chair and looking at Lord Henry over the heavy clusters of the purple-lipped irises that stood in the center of the table. What do you mean by good, Harry?
To be good is to be in harmony with oneself,
he replied, touching the thin stem of his glass with his pale, fine, pointed fingers.
Discord is to be forced to be in harmony with others. One's own life, that's the important thing. As for the lives of one's neighbours, if one wishes to be a prig or a Puritan, one can flaunt one's moral views about them, but they are not one's concern. Besides, individualism has really the higher aim. Modern morality consists in accepting the standard of one's age. I consider that for any man of culture to accept the standard of his age is a form of the grossest immorality.
But surely if one lives life for oneself, Harry, one pays a terrible price for doing so,
suggested the painter.
Yes, well, we're all overcharged for everything nowadays. I should fancy that the real tragedy of the poor is that they can afford nothing but self-denial. Beautiful sins, like beautiful things, are the privilege of the rich.
One has to pay in other ways but money. What sort of ways, Basil?
Oh, I should fancy in remorse, in suffering, in, well, the consciousness of degradation.
Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders.
My dear fellow, medieval art is charming, but medieval emotions are dreadfully out of date. One can use them in fiction, of course, but those are the only things that one can use in fiction, is things that one has ceased to use in fact. Believe me, no civilized man ever regrets a pleasure, and no uncivilized man ever knows what a pleasure is.
I know what pleasure is. It's to adore someone, cried Dorian Gray.
That is certainly better than being adored,
he answered, toying with some fruits.
Being adored is a nuisance. Women treat us just as humanity treats its gods. They worship us and are always bothering us to do something for them.
I should have said that whatever they ask for, they're first given to us. They create love in our natures. They have a right to demand it back.
That's quite true, too.
That's quite true, Dorian.
Nothing is ever quite true.
This is. You must admit, Henry, that women give to men the very gold of their lives.
Possibly, but they invariably want it back in such very small change. That's the worry. Women as such, as some witty Frenchman once put it, inspire us with a desire to do masterpieces and always prevent us from carrying them out.
Harry, you're dreadful.
I don't know why. Wait, no, this is Dorian. Harry, you're dreadful. I don't know why I like you so much.
You'll always like me, Dorian. Will you have some coffee, fellows? Waiter, bring coffee and fine champagne and some cigarettes. No, don't mind the cigarettes. I have some. Basil, I can't allow you to smoke cigars. You must have a cigarette. A cigarette's the perfect type of a perfect pleasure. It's exquisite, leaves one unsatisfied. What more can one want? Yes, Dorian, You'll always be fond of me. I represent to you all the sins you've never had the courage to commit.
What nonsense you talk, Harry, cried the lad, taking a light from a fire-breathing silver dragon that the waiter had placed on the table. Let us go down to the theatre. When Sybil comes on the stage, you'll have a new ideal of life. She'll represent something to you you've never known.
But I've known everything, said Lord Henry, with a tired look in his eyes. But I'm always ready for a new emotion. I'm afraid, however, that for me, at any rate, there's no such thing. Still, your wonderful girl may thrill me. I love acting. It's so much more real than life. Let us go. Dorian, come with me. I'm so sorry, Basil, but there's only room for 2 in the brougham. You must follow us in a hansom.
And they got up and put on their coats, sipping their coffee standing. The painter was silent and preoccupied. There was a gloom over him. He couldn't bear this marriage, and yet it seemed to him to be better than many other things that might have happened. After a few minutes they all passed downstairs, and he drove off by himself, as had been arranged, and watched the flashing lights of the little brougham in front of him. A strange sense of loss came over him, and he felt that Dorian Gray would never again be to him all that he'd been in the past. Life had come between them. His eyes darkened, and the crowded, flaring streets became blurred to his eyes. When the cab drew up at the theatre, it seemed to him that he'd grown years older. All right, before we get into Chapter 7, I am going to take a short water break. I need to... How do I change what's on the right here? Oop, that's... Okay, I think... Okay, good. I did mean to do that. Okay. Oops. Ooh. See, this is what I get for tinkering with my layouts. Now they're all hecked up. I will be right back. I'm going to grab some water. I suggest that you all do the same. Maybe if you've got some calories, eat something. Even if you don't have some calories, get up, wander around. It's not good to sit still for too long. I'll be back in a little bit. After our short intermission, we'll get right back into it with Chapter 7. Alright, I hope everyone had a lovely intermission. I went and got some water. I went and got my stretch on. I hope you all did the same. I actually... I just thought of something. Apologies about that. I thought of something that I needed to check, but we've checked it. Let's get back to Chapter 7. For some reason or other, the house was crowded that night, and the fat old man manager who met them at the door was beaming from ear to ear with an oily, tremulous smile. He escorted them to their box with a sort of pompous humility, waving his fat jeweled hands and talking at the top of his voice. Dorian Gray loathed him more than ever. He felt as if he'd come to look for Miranda, and had been met by Caliban. Lord Henry, on the other hand, rather liked him. At least he declared he did, and insisted on shaking him by the hand and assuring him that he was proud to meet a man who had discovered a real genius and gone bankrupt over a poet. Hallward amused himself with watching the faces in the pit. The heat was terribly oppressive, and the huge sunlight flamed like a monstrous dahlia with petals of yellow fire. The youths in the gallery had taken off their coats and waistcoats and hung them over the side. They talked to each other across the theatre and shared their oranges with the tawdry girls who sat beside them. Some women were laughing in the pit. Their voices were terribly shrill and discordant, and the sound of the popping of corks came from the bar.
What a place to find one's divinity in.
Yes, it was here that I found her, and she's divine beyond all living things. When she acts, you'll forget everything. Those common rough people with their coarse faces and brutal gestures, they become quite different when she's on the stage. They'll sit silently and watch her. They weep and laugh as she wills them to do. She makes them as responsive as a violin. She spiritualizes them, and one feels that they're of the same flesh and blood as oneself.
The same flesh and blood as oneself? Oh, I hope not, exclaimed Lord Henry, who was scanning the occupants of the gallery through his opera glass.
Don't pay any attention to him, Dorian. I understand what you mean, and I believe in this girl. Anyone you love must be marvelous, and any girl who has the effect you describe must be fine and noble. To spiritualize one's age, that's something worth doing. If this girl can give a soul to those who have lived without one, if she can create the sense of beauty in people whose lives have been sordid and ugly, if she can strip them of their selfishness and lend them tears for sorrows that are not their own, she's worthy of all your adoration, worthy of the adoration of the world. This marriage is quite right. I didn't think so at first, but I admit it now. The gods made Sybil Vane for you. Without her, you would have been incomplete. Thank you, Basil. I knew you would understand me. Harry's so cynical, he terrifies me. But here's the orchestra. It's quite dreadful, but it only lasts for about 5 minutes, and then the curtain rises, and you'll see the girl to whom I'm going to give all my life, to whom I've given everything that's good in me. A quarter of an hour afterwards, amidst an extraordinary turmoil of applause, Sybil Vane stepped onto the stage. Yes, she was certainly lovely to look at. One of the loveliest creatures, Lord Henry thought, that he'd ever seen. There was something of the fawn in her shy grace and startled eyes. A faint blush, like the shadow of a rose in a mirror of silver, came to her cheeks when she glanced at the crowded, enthusiastic house. When she stepped back a few paces, and her lips seemed to tremble. Basil Hallward leapt to his feet and began to applaud. Motionless, and as one in a dream, sat Dorian Gray gazing at her. Lord Henry peered through his glasses, murmuring, "Oh, charming, charming." The scene was the hall of Capulet's house, and Romeo in his pilgrim's dress had entered with Mercutio and his other friends. The band, such as it was, struck up a few bars of music, and the dance began. Through the crowd of ungainly, shabbily dressed actors, Sybil Vane moved like a creature from a finer world. Her body swayed while she danced, as a plant sways in the water, and the curves of her throat were the curves of a white lily, and her hands seemed to be made of cool ivory. Yet she was curiously listless. She showed no sign of joy when her eyes rested on Romeo, and the few words she had to speak. "Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this, for saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss." With the brief dialogue that follows, were spoken in a thoroughly artificial manner. The voice was exquisite, but from the point of view of tone it was absolutely false. It was wrong in color. It took away the life from the verse. It made the passion unreal. Dorian Gray grew pale as he watched her. He was puzzled and anxious. Neither of his friends dared to say anything to him. She seemed to them to be absolutely incompetent. They were horribly disappointed. Yet they felt that a true test of any Juliet is the balcony scene of the second act, and so they waited for that. If she failed there was nothing in her. She looked charming as she came out in the moonlight, that couldn't be denied, but the staginess of her acting was unbearable, and grew worse as she went on. Her gestures became absurdly artificial. She overemphasized everything she had to say. The beautiful passage, "Thou knowest the mask of night is on my face, else would a maiden blush bepain my cheek, for that now which thou hast heard me speak tonight," was declaimed with the painful precision of a schoolgirl who had been taught to recite by some second-rate professor of elocution. When she leaned over the balcony and came to these wonderful lines, "Although I joy in thee, I have no joy in this contract tonight. It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning which doth cease to be, ere one can say it lightens. Sweet good night, this bud of love, by summer's ripening breath, may prove a beauteous flower when we next meet." She spoke the words as though they conveyed no meaning to her. It wasn't nervousness. Indeed, so far from being nervous, she seemed absolutely self-contained. It was quite simply bad art. She was a failure, a complete failure. Even the common, uneducated audience of the pit and gallery lost their interest in the play. They got restless and began to talk loudly and whistle. The old manager, who was standing at the back of the dress circle, stamped and swore with rage. The only person unmoved was the girl herself. and when the second act was over there came a storm of hisses, and Lord Henry got up from his chair and put on his coat.
She's quite beautiful, Dorian, but such a shame she can't act. Let us go.
I'm going to see the play through, answered the lad in a hard, bitter voice. I'm awfully sorry that I made you waste an evening, Harry. I apologize to you both.
My
dear Dorian, I think Miss Vane was ill. We shall come one other night.
I wish she were ill, but she seems to be simply callous and cold. She is entirely altered. Last night she was a great artist. This evening she's merely a commonplace, mediocre actress.
Don't talk like that about anyone you love, Dorian. Love's a more wonderful thing than art.
They're both simply forms of imitation. But do let us go. Dorian, you mustn't stay here any longer. It's not good for one's morals to see bad acting. Besides, I don't suppose you'll want your wife to act, so what does it matter if she plays Juliet like a wooden doll? She's very lovely, and if she knows as little about life as she does about acting, she'll be a delightful experience. There are only two kinds of people who are really fascinating. People who know absolutely everything and people who know absolutely nothing. Good heavens, my dear boy, don't look so tragic. The secret of remaining young is never to have an emotion that is unbecoming. Come to the club with Basil and myself. We'll smoke cigarettes and drink to the beauty of Sybil Vane. She is beautiful. What more could you want?
Go away, Harry. I want to be alone. Basil, you must go. Can't you see that my heart's breaking? The hot tears came to his eyes and his lips trembled, and he rushed to the back of the box, leaning against the wall, hiding his face in his hands.
Let us go, Basil,
said Henry with a strange tenderness in his voice, and the two young men passed out together. A few moments afterwards the footlights flared up and the curtain rose on the third act. Dorian Gray went back to his seat, and he looked pale, proud, and indifferent. The play dragged on and seemed interminable. Half the audience left out, tramping in heavy boots and laughing. The whole thing was a fiasco. The last act was played to almost empty benches. The curtain went down on a titter and some groans. And as soon as it was over, Dorian Gray rushed behind the scenes into the green room. The girl was standing there alone with a look of triumph on her face. Her eyes were lit with an exquisite fire. There was a radiance about her. Her parted lips were smiling over some secret of their own. When he entered, she looked at him, and an expression of infinite joy came over her. "How badly I acted tonight, Dorian!" "Horribly," he answered, gazing at her in amazement. "Horribly. It was dreadful. Are you ill? You have no idea what it was. You have no idea what I suffered." The girl smiled. "Dorian," she answered, lingering over his name with long, drawn music in her voice, as though it were sweeter than honey to the red petals of her mouth. "Dorian, you should have understood, but you understand now, don't you?" "Understand what?" "Why I was so bad tonight. Why I shall always be bad. Why I shall never act well again." He shrugged his shoulders. "You're ill, I suppose. When you're ill you shouldn't act. You make yourself ridiculous. My friends were bored. I was bored." She seemed to not listen to him. She was transfigured with joy. An ecstasy of happiness dominated her. Dorian, before I knew you, acting was the one reality of my life. It was only in the theatre that I lived. I thought it was all true. I was Rosalind one night and Portia the other. The joy of Beatrice was also my joy. The sorrows of Cordelia were mine as well. I believed in everything. The common people who acted with me seemed to be godlike. The painted scenes were my world. I knew nothing but shadows, and I thought them real. You came, oh, my beautiful love, and you freed my soul from prison. You taught me what reality really is. Tonight, for the first time in my life, I saw through the hollowness, the sham, the silliness of the empty pageant in which I had always played. Tonight, for the first time, I became conscious that Romeo was hideous, and old and painted, that the moonlight in the orchard was false, the scenery was vulgar, and that the words I had to speak were unreal, weren't my words, were not what I had to say. You brought me something higher, something of which all art is but a reflection. You made me understand what love really is. My love, my Prince Charming, Prince of Life, I've grown sick of shadows. You're more to me than all art can ever be.
What do I have to do with puppets of a play? When I came on tonight, I couldn't understand how it was that everything had gone from me. I thought I was going to be wonderful. I found that I couldn't do anything, and suddenly it dawned on my soul what it all meant. The knowledge was exquisite to me. I heard them hissing, and I smiled. What could they know of love such as ours? Take me away, Dorian. Take me away with you, where we can be quite alone. I hate the stage. I might mimic a passion I do not feel, but I cannot mimic one that burns me like fire. Dorian, can you understand what it signifies now? Even if I could do it, it would be profanation for me to play at being in love. You've made me see that. And he flung himself down on the sofa and turned away his face. You've killed my love. She looked at him in wonder and laughed. He made no answer, and she came across to him and with her little fingers stroked his hair. She knelt down and pressed his hands to her lips. He drew them away, and a shudder ran through him. And then he leapt up and went to the door. Yes, you've killed my love. You used to stir my imagination, now you don't even stir my curiosity. You simply produced no effect. I loved you because you were marvelous, because you had genius and intellect, because you realized the dreams of great poets and gave shape and substance to the shadows of art. You've thrown it all away. You're shallow and stupid. Oh my God, how mad I was to love you. What a fool I've been. You are nothing to me now. I'll never see you again. I'll never think of you. I'll never mention your name. You don't know what you were to me once. Why, once I can't bear to think of it. I wish I'd never laid eyes upon you. Oh, you've spoiled the romance of my life. How little do you know of love if you say it mars your art. Without your art, you're nothing. I'd have made you famous, splendid, magnificent. The world could have worshipped you, and you'd have borne my name. What are you now, a third-rate actress with a pretty face? The girl grew white and trembled, and she clenched her hands together, and her voice seemed to catch in her throat. You're not serious, Dorian. You're acting. Acting? I leave that to you. You do it so well. And she rose from her knees, and with a piteous expression of pain in her face, came across the room to him. She put her hand upon his arm and looked into his eyes, and he thrust her back. Don't touch me. A low groan broke from her, and she flung herself at his feet and lay there like a trampled flower. Dorian, don't leave me. I'm so sorry I didn't act well. I was thinking of you all the time. I'll try. I will. It came so suddenly across me, my love for you. I should have never have known it if you'd not kissed me, if we'd not kissed each other. Kiss me again, my love. Don't go away from me. I couldn't bear it. Oh, don't go away from me. My brother, no. No, never mind. He didn't mean it. It was in jest. But can you forgive me for tonight? I work so hard and try to improve. Don't be cruel to me. I love you better than anything in the world. After all, it's only once that I've not pleased you. But you're quite right, Dorian. I should have shown myself more of an artist. It was foolish of me, and yet I couldn't help it. Don't leave me. And a fit of passionate sobbing choked her. She crouched on the floor like a wounded thing, and Dorian Gray, with his beautiful eyes, looked down at her, and his chiseled lips curled in exquisite disdain. There's always something ridiculous about the emotions of people whom one has ceased to love. Sybil Vane seemed to him to be absurdly melodramatic. Her tears and sobs annoyed him. I'm going, he said at last in his calm, clear voice. I don't wish to be unkind, but I can't see you again. You've disappointed me. She wept silently and made no answer, but crept nearer, her little hands stretched blindly out, and appeared to be seeking for him. He turned on his heel and left the room. In a few moments he was out of the theatre. Where he went to, he hardly knew. He remembered wandering through dimly lit streets past gaunt, black-shadowed archways and evil-looking houses. Women with hoarse voices and harsh laughter called after him. Drunkards reeled by, cursing and chattering to themselves like monstrous apes. He'd seen grotesque children huddled upon doorsteps, and heard shrieks and oaths from gloomy courts. And as the dawn was breaking, he found himself close to Covent Garden. The darkness lifted, and flushed with faint fires, the sky hollowed itself into a perfect pearl. The huge carts filled with nodding lilies rumbled slowly down the polished empty street. The air was heavy with the perfume of the flowers, and their beauty seemed to bring him an anodyne for his pain. He followed into the market and watched them unloading their wagons. A white-smocked carter offered him some cherries, and he thanked him, wondered why he refused to accept any money for them, and began to eat them listlessly. They had been plucked at midnight, and the coldness of the moon had entered into them. A long line of boys, carrying crates of striped tulips and of yellow and red roses, defiled in front of them, threading their way through the huge jade-green piles of vegetables. Under the portico, with its grey sun-bleached pillars, loitered a troop of draggled, bare-headed girls, waiting for the auction to be over. Others crowded round the swinging doors of the coffee-house and the piazza. The heavy cart-horses slipped and stamped upon the rough stones, shaking their bells and trappings. Some of the drivers were lying asleep on a pile of sacks. Iris-necked and pink-footed, the pigeons ran about, picking up seeds. After a little while he hailed a hansom and drove home. For a few moments he loitered upon the doorstep, looking round at the silent square with its blank, close-shuttered windows and its staring blinds. The sky was pure opal now, and the roofs of the houses glistened like silver against it. From some chimney opposite a thin wreath of smoke was rising. It curled a violet ribbon through the nacre-coloured air. In the huge gilt Venetian lantern, spoil of some Doge's barge that hung from the ceiling of the great oak-panelled hall of entrance, lights were still burning from 3 flickering jets. Thin blue petals of flame they seemed, rimmed with white fire. He turned them out, and, having thrown his hat and cape on the table, passed through the library towards the door of his bedroom, a large octagonal chamber on the ground floor that, in his newborn feeling for luxury, he had just decorated for himself and hung with some curious Renaissance tapestries that had been discovered stored in a disused attic at Selby Royal. As he was turning the handle of the door, his eye fell upon the portrait Basil Hallward had painted of him, and he started back as if in surprise. Then he went on to his own room, looking somewhat puzzled. After he had taken the buttonhole out of his coat, he seemed to hesitate, and finally he came back, went over to the picture, and examined it. In the dim, arrested light that struggled through the cream-coloured silk blinds, the face appeared to him to be a little changed. The expression looked different. One would have said that there was a touch of cruelty in the mouth. It was certainly strange. He turned round and, walking to the window, drew up the blind. The bright dawn flooded the room and swept the fantastic shadows into dusky corners, where they lay shuddering. But the strange expression that he had noticed in the face of the portrait seemed to linger there, almost intensify. The quivering ardent sunlight showed him the lines of cruelty round the mouth as clearly as if he'd been looking into a mirror after he'd done some dreadful thing. He winced, and taking up from the table an oval glass framed in ivory cupids, one of Lord Henry's many presents to him, glanced hurriedly into its polished depths. No line like that warped his red lips. What did it mean? He rubbed his eyes and came close to the picture and examined it again. There were no signs of any change when he looked into the actual painting, and yet there was no doubt that the whole expression had altered. It wasn't a mere fancy of his own. The thing was horribly apparent. He threw himself into a chair and began to think, and suddenly there flashed across his mind what had been said in Basil Hallward's studio the day the picture had been finished. Yes, he remembered it perfectly. He'd uttered a mad wish that he himself might remain young and the portrait grow old, and that his own beauty might be untarnished, the face on the canvas bear the burden of his passions and his sins, that the painted image might be seared with the lines of suffering and thought, and that he might keep all the delicate bloom and loveliness of his, then just conscious boyhood. Surely his wish had not been fulfilled. Such things were impossible. It seemed monstrous to even think of them, and yet there was the picture before him with the touch of cruelty in the mouth. Cruelty. Had he been cruel? It was the girl's fault, not his. He had dreamed of her as a great artist, had given his love to her because he thought her great, and then she'd disappointed him. She'd been sallow and unworthy. And yet, as a feeling of infinite regret came over him, as he thought of her lying at his feet, sobbing like a little child, he remembered with what callousness he had watched her. Why had he been made like that? Why had such a soul been given to him? But he had suffered also. During the 3 terrible hours that the play had lasted, he'd lived centuries of pain, eon upon eon of torture. His life was well worth hers. She'd marred him for a moment, if he'd wounded her for an age. Besides, women were better suited to bear sorrow than men. They lived on their emotions. They only thought of their emotions. When they took lovers, it was merely to have someone with whom they could have scenes.
Lord Henry had told him that, and Lord Henry knew what women were. Why should he trouble about Sybil Vane? She was nothing to him now. But the picture, what was he to say of that? It held the secret of his life and told his story. It had taught him to love his own beauty. Would it teach him to loathe his own soul? Would he ever look at it again? No. It was merely an illusion wrought on the troubled senses. The horrible night that he'd passed had left phantoms behind it. Suddenly there had fallen upon his brain the tiny scarlet speck that makes men mad. The picture hadn't changed. It was folly to think so. And yet it was watching him, with its delightful marred face and cruel smile. Its bright hair gleamed in the early sunlight, and its blue eyes met his own. A sense of infinite pity, not for himself, but for the painted image of himself, came over him. It had altered already, and would alter more. Its gold would wither into grey, its red and white roses would die. For every sin that he committed, a stain would fleck and wreck its fairness. But he wouldn't sin. The picture, changed or unchanged, would be to him the visible emblem of conscience. He could resist temptation. He wouldn't see Lord Henry any more. Wouldn't at any rate, listen to those subtle, poisonous theories that in Basil Hallward's garden had first stirred within him the passion for impossible things. He would go back to Sybil Vane, make her amends, marry her, try to love her again. It was his duty to do so. She must have suffered more than he had. The poor child, he'd been selfish and cruel to her. The fascination that she had exercised over him would return. They'd be happy together. His life with her would be beautiful and pure. He got up from his chair and drew a large screen right in front of the portrait, shuddering as he glanced at it. "How horrible," he murmured to himself, and walked across to the window and opened it. And when he stepped out onto the grass, he drew a deep breath. The fresh morning air seemed to drive away all his sombre passions, and he thought only of Sybil. A faint echo of his love came back to him. He repeated her name over and over again, and the birds that were singing in the dew-drenched garden seemed to be telling the flowers about her. Chapter 8. It was long past noon when he awoke. His valet had crept several times on tiptoe into the room to see if he was stirring, and had wondered what had made his young master sleep so late. And finally his bell sounded, and Victor came in softly with a cup of tea and a pile of letters on a small tray of old Sevres china, and drew back the olive satin curtains, with their shimmering blue lining, that hung in front of the 3 tall windows. "Monsieur has slept well this morning."
What hour is it, Victor?"
asked Dorian Gray, drowsily.
1 hour and a quarter, monsieur."
How late it was! He sat up, and having sipped some tea, turned over his letters. One of them was from Lord Henry, and had been brought over by hand that morning. He hesitated for a moment, and then put it aside, and the others he opened listlessly. They contained the usual collection of cards, invitations to dinner, tickets to private views, programs of charity concerts, and the like that are showered on fashionable young men every morning during the season. There was a rather heavy bill for a chased silver Louise Quinzet toilet set that he had not yet had the courage to send on to his guardians, who were extremely old-fashioned people, and did not realize that we live in an age when unnecessary things are our only necessities. And there were several very courteously worded communications from Jermyn Street money-lenders, offering to advance any sum of money at a moment's notice and at the most reasonable rates of interest. And after about 10 minutes he got up, and throwing on an elaborate dressing gown of silk-embroidered cashmere wool, passed into the onyx-paved bathroom. The cool water refreshed him after his long sleep, and he seemed to have forgotten all that he had gone through. A dim sense of having taken part in some strange tragedy came to him once or twice, but there was the unreality of a dream about it. As soon as he was dressed, he went into the library and sat down to a light French breakfast that had been laid out for him on a small round table close to the open window. It was an exquisite day. The warm air seemed laden with spices. A bee flew in and buzzed round the blue dragon bowl that, filled with sulphur-yellow roses, stood before him, and he felt perfectly happy. Suddenly his eye fell on the screen that he had placed in front of the portrait, and he started a bit.
"Too cold for monsieur?" asked his valet, putting an omelette on the table. "I shut the window?"
Dorian shook his head.
I'm not cold,
he murmured. Was it all true? Had the portrait really changed? Or had it simply been his own imagination that made him see a look of evil where there'd been a look of joy? Certainly a painted canvas couldn't alter. The thing was absurd. It would serve as a tale to tell Basil some day, and it would make him smile. And yet, how vivid was his recollection of the whole thing! First in the dim twilight, and then in the bright dawn, he'd seen the touch of cruelty round the warped lips. He almost dreaded his valet leaving the room. He knew that when he was alone he would have to examine the portrait. He was afraid of certainty. When the coffee and cigarettes had been brought and the man turned to go, he felt a wild desire to tell him to remain. As the door was closing behind him, he called him back, and the man stood waiting for his orders. Dorian looked at him for a moment.
I am not at home to anyone, Victor,
he said with a sigh, and the man bowed and retired. Then he rose from the table, lit a cigarette, and flung himself down on a luxuriously cushioned couch that stood facing the screen. The screen was an old one, of gilt Spanish leather, stamped and wrought with a rather florid Louis XIV pattern. He scanned it curiously, wondering if ever before it had concealed the secret of a man's life. Okay, before we go any further, I need to know what a Louis XIV pattern looks like. Louis XIV's pattern. Louis XIV's. Noting and pertaining to the style of architecture, furnishings, and decoration prevailing in France in the late 17th century, characterized by increasingly classicizing tendencies and an emphasis on dignity rather than comfort. So, is it simple? Is that what's up? I mean, there's obviously an architectural movement, but this isn't what I want. I want the... Yeah, I know what the architecture movement looks like. Come on, give me the interior decoration. It's in the same fashion as the architectural style, very gilded and flowery and, well, over-dramatic is what the modern eye would call it. At least, my modern eye calls it. Anyway, returning to the story. Should he move it aside after all? Why not let it stay there? What was the use of knowing? If the thing was true, that was terrible. And if it wasn't true, why trouble about it? But what if by some fate or deadlier chance, eyes other than his spied behind and saw the horrible change? What should he do if Basil Hallward came and asked to look at his own picture? Basil would be sure to do that. No, the thing had to be examined, and at once. Anything would be better than this dreadful state of doubt. He got up and locked both doors. At least he would be alone when he looked upon the mask of his shame. Then he drew the screen aside and saw himself face to face, and it was perfectly true. The portrait had altered. As he often remembered afterwards, and always with no small wonder, he found himself at first gazing at the portrait with a feeling of almost scientific interest. That such a change should have taken place was incredible to him, and yet it was a fact. Was there some subtle affinity between the chemical atoms that shaped themselves into form and colour on the canvas, and the soul that was within him? Could it be that what the soul thought they realized? That what it dreamed they made true? Or was there some other more terrible reason? He shuddered, and felt afraid, and going back to the couch lay there, gazing at the picture in sickened horror. One thing, however, he felt that it had done for him. It had made him conscious how unjust, how cruel he had been to Sybil Vane. It was not too late to make reparation for that. She could still be his wife. His unreal and selfish love would yield to some higher influence, would be transformed into some nobler passion, and the portrait that Basil Hallward had painted of him would be a guide to him through life, would be to him what holiness is to some, and conscience to other, and the fear of God is to us all. There were opiates for remorse, drugs that could lull the morose sense to sleep, but here was a visible symbol of the degradation of sin. Here was an ever-present sign of the ruin men brought upon their souls. 3 o'clock struck, and 4, and the half-hour rang its double chime, but Dorian Gray didn't stir. He was trying to gather up the scarlet threads of life and weave them into a pattern, to find his way through the sanguine labyrinth of passion through that which he was wandering. He didn't know what to do or what to think, and finally he went over to the table and wrote a passionate letter to the girl he loved, imploring her forgiveness and accusing himself of madness. He covered page after page with wild words of sorrow and wilder words of pain. There's a luxury in self-reproach. When we blame ourselves, we feel that no one else has a right to blame us. It's the confession, not the priest, that gives us absolution. When Dorian had finished the letter, he felt that he had been forgiven. And suddenly there came a knock to the door, and he heard Lord Henry's voice outside.
"My dear boy, I must see you. Let me in at once. I can't bear yourself shutting yourself up like this."
He made no answer at first, but remained quite still. The knocking still continued and grew louder. It was better to let Lord Henry in and explain to him the new life he was going to lead, to quarrel with him if it became necessary to quarrel, to part if parting was inevitable. He jumped up, drew the screen hastily across the picture, and unlocked the door.
"I'm so sorry for it all, Dorian, but you mustn't think too much about it."
"Do you mean about Sybil Vane?"
"Yes, of course,"
answered Lord Henry, sinking into a chair and slowly pulling off his yellow gloves.
"It's dreadful from one point of view, but it was not your fault. Tell me, did you go behind and see her after the play was over?"
"Yes."
"I felt sure you had. Did you make a scene with her?"
"I was brutal, Harry. Perfectly brutal. But it's all right now. I'm not sorry for anything that's happened. It's taught me to know myself better."
Dorian, I'm so glad you take it in that way. I was afraid I'd find you plunged in remorse and tearing that nice curly hair of yours."
"I've got through all that," said Dorian, shaking his head and smiling. "I'm perfectly happy now. I know what conscience is to begin with. It's not what you told me it was, it's the divinest thing in us. Don't sneer at me, Harry, any more, at least not before me. I want to be good. I can't bear the idea of my soul being hideous."
"A very charming basis for ethics." "A very charming basis for ethics, Dorian, almost artistic. I congratulate you on it, but how are you going to begin?"
By marrying Sybil Vane."
"Marrying Sybil Vane?"
cried Lord Henry, standing up and looking at him in perplexed amazement.
"But my dear Dorian—"
"Yes, Henry, I know what you're going to say. Something dreadful about marriage. Don't say it. Don't ever say things of that kind to me again. 2 days ago I asked Sybil to marry me. I'm not going to break my word to her. She is to be my wife."
"Your wife? Dorian! Didn't you get my letter? I wrote to you this morning and sent the note down by my own man."
"Your letter? Oh, yes, I remember. I haven't read it yet, Harry. I was afraid there might be something in it that I wouldn't like. You cut life to pieces with your epigrams."
"You know nothing, then?"
"What do you mean?" Lord Henry walked across the room and, sitting down by Dorian Gray, took both his hands in his own and held them tightly.
"Dorian, my letter, don't be frightened, was to tell you that Sybil Vane is dead."
A cry of pain broke from the lad's lips, and he leapt to his feet, tearing his hands away from Lord Henry's grasp. "Dead? Sybil dead? It's not true. It's a terrible lie. How dare you say it?"
"It's quite true, Dorian. I saw it all in the morning papers. I wrote down to you to ask you not to see anyone until I came. There'll have to be an inquest, of course, and you must not be mixed up in it. Things like that make a man fashionable in Paris, but here in London people are so prejudiced. Here one should never make one's debut with a scandal. One should reserve that to an interest in one's old age. I suppose they didn't know your name at the theatre. If they don't, it's all right. Did anyone see you going round to her room? That's an important point."
Dorian didn't answer for a few moments. He was still dazed with his horror, and finally he stammered in a stifled voice, "Harry, did you say an inquest? What did you mean by that? Did Sybil? Oh, Harry, I can't bear it, but be quick, tell me everything at once.
I have no doubt it was not an accident, Dorian, though it must be put that way to the public. It seems as that she was leaving the theatre with her mother about 12:30 or so. She said she'd forgotten something upstairs. They waited some time for her, but she didn't come down again. They ultimately found her lying dead on the floor of her dressing room. She'd swallowed something by mistake, some dreadful thing they use at theatres. I don't know what it was, but it had either prussic acid or white lead in it. I should fancy it was prussic acid, as she seems to have died instantly.
Harry, this is terrible.
Yes, it's very tragic, but you mustn't get yourself mixed up in it. I see by the standard she was 17. I should have thought she was almost younger than that. She looked like such a child, and she seemed to know so little about acting. Dorian, you mustn't let this thing get on your nerves. You must come and dine with me, and afterwards we'll look in at the opera. It's a Paddy night, and everyone will be there. You can come to my sister's box. She's got some smart women with her.
I've murdered Sybil Vane. Murdered her as surely as if I had cut her little throat with a knife. And yet the roses are not less lovely for all that. The birds sing just as happily in my garden. Tonight I'm to dine with you, and then go to the opera and sup somewhere, I suppose, afterwards. How extraordinarily dramatic life is. If I'd read all this in a book, Harry, I think I would have wept over it. Somehow, now that it's happened actually to me, that it seems far too wonderful for tears. Here's the first passionate love letter I've ever written in my life. Strange that my first passionate love letter should have been addressed to a dead girl. Can they feel, I wonder, those white silent people we call the dead? Sybil. Can she know? Can she feel? Can she listen? Oh, Harry, how I loved her once. It seems years ago to me now. She was everything to me. Then came that dreadful night. Or was it really only last night, when she played so badly and my heart almost broke? She explained it all to me, and it was terribly pathetic, but I was not moved a bit. I thought her sallow. Something happened. Suddenly. It's made me afraid. I can't tell you what it was, but it was terrible. I said I would go back to her. I felt I'd done wrong. Now she's dead. Harry, what shall I do? You don't know the danger I'm in. There's nothing to keep me straight. She'd have done that for me. She had no right to do that. It was selfish of her.
My dear Dorian,
answered Henry, taking a cigarette from his case and producing a gold Latin matchbox.
The only way a woman can ever reform a man is by boring him so completely that he loses all possible interest in life. If you'd married this girl, you'd have been wretched. Of course, you'd have treated her kindly. One can always be kind to people about whom cares nothing. But she would have soon found out that you were absolutely indifferent to her. And when a woman finds out that about her husband, she either becomes dreadfully dowdy, or wears very smart bonnets that some other woman's husband has to pay for. I say nothing about the social mistake which would have been abject, which of course I would not have allowed, but I assure you that in any case the whole thing would have been an absolute failure.
I suppose it would, muttered the lad, walking up and down the room and looking terribly pale. But I thought it was my duty. It was not my fault that this terrible tragedy has prevented my doing what was right. I remember your saying once that there's a fatality about good resolutions. They're always made too late. Mine certainly were.
Good resolutions are useless attempts to interfere with scientific laws, my boy. Their origin is pure vanity. Their result is absolutely nil. They give us, now and then, some of those luxurious, sterile emotions that have a certain charm for the weak. That's all that can be said for them. They're simply checks that men draw on a bank where they have no account. Harry, cried Dorian Gray, coming over and sitting down beside him, why is it that I cannot feel this tragedy as much as I want to? I don't think I'm heartless, do you? You've done too many foolish things during the last fortnight to be entitled to give yourself that name, Dorian, answered Lord Henry with a sweet, melancholy smile. I don't like that explanation, Harry, but I'm glad you don't think I'm heartless. I'm nothing of the kind, I know I'm not, and I must admit, this thing that has happened doesn't seem to affect me as it should. It seems to me to be simply like a wonderful ending to a wonderful play. It has all the terrible beauty of a Greek tragedy, a tragedy in which I took a great part, but by which I have not been wounded. It is an interesting question.
said Lord Henry, who found an exquisite pleasure in playing on the lad's unconscious egotism.
An extremely interesting question. I fancy that the true explanation is this. It often happens that the real tragedies of life occur in such an inartistic manner that they hurt us by their crude violence, their absolute incoherence, their absurd want of meaning, their entire lack of style. They affect us just as vulgarity affects us. They give us an impression of sheer brute force, and we revolt against that. Sometimes, however, a tragedy that possesses artistic elements of beauty crosses our lives. If these elements of beauty are real, the whole thing simply appeals to our sense of dramatic effect. Suddenly we find that we are no longer the actors, but the spectators of the play, or rather we're both. We watch ourselves, and the mere wonder of the spectacle enthralls us. In the present case, what is it that has really happened? Someone has killed himself for love of you. I wish that I had ever had such an experience. It would have made me in love with love for the rest of my life. The people who have adored me, there have not been very many, but there have been some, have always insisted on living on, long after I'd ceased to care for them. Or they to care for me. They have become stout and tedious, and when I meet them they go in at once for reminiscences. That awful memory of a woman, what fearful thing it is, and what another intellectual stagnation it reveals. One should absorb the colour of life, but one should never remember its details. Details are always so vulgar.
I must sow poppies in my garden.
There is no necessity. Life always has poppies in her hands. Of course, now and then things linger. I once wore nothing but violets all through one season as a form of artistic mourning for a romance that wouldn't die. Ultimately, however, it did die. I forget what killed it. I think it was her proposing to sacrifice the whole world for me. That's always a dreadful moment. It fills one with the terror of an eternity. Well, would you believe it? A week ago, at Lady Hampshire's, I found myself seated at dinner next to the lady in question, and she insisted upon going over the whole thing again, and digging up the past and raking up the future. I'd buried my romance in a bed of asphodel, and she dragged it out again and assured me that I'd spoiled her life. I'm bound to state that she ate an enormous dinner, so I didn't feel any anxiety. But what a lack of taste she showed. The one charm of the past is that it is the past, but the women never know when the curtain's fallen. They always want a sixth act, and as soon as the interest of the play is entirely over, they propose to continue it. If they were allowed their own way, every comedy would have a tragic ending, and every tragedy would culminate in a farce. They're charmingly artificial, but they have no sense of art. You're more fortunate than I am, I assure you, Dorian, that not one of the women that I would have known would have done for me what Sybil Vane did for you. Ordinary women always console themselves. Some of them must do it by going in for sentimental colours. Never trust a woman who wears mauve, whatever her age may be, or a woman over 35 that is fond of pink ribbons. It always means that they have a history. Others find a great consolation in suddenly discovering the good qualities of their husbands. They flaunt their conjugal felicity in one's face, as if it were the most fascinating of sins. Religion consoles some. Its mysteries have all the charm of a flirtation, a woman once told me, and I can quite understand it. Besides, nothing makes one so vain as being told that one is a sinner. Conscience makes egoists of us all. Yes, there really is no end to the consolations that women find in modern life. Indeed, I've not mentioned the most important one.
What is that, Harry?
Oh, the obvious consolation. Taking someone else's admirer when one loses one's own. In good society that always whitewashes a woman. But really, Dorian, how different Sybil Vane must have been from all the women one meets. There's something to be quite beautiful about her death. I'm glad I'm living in a century when such wonders happen. They make one believe in the reality of all the things we play with, such as romance, passion, and love.
I was terribly cruel to her. You forget that.
I am afraid that women appreciate cruelty, downright cruelty, more than anything else. They've wonderfully primitive instincts. We've emancipated them, but they remain slaves looking for their masters. All the same, they love being dominated. I'm sure you were splendid. I've never seen you really absolutely angry, but I can fancy how delightful you looked. And after all, you said something to me the day before yesterday that seemed to me at the time to be merely fanciful, and but that I see now was absolutely true, and it holds the key to everything.
What was that, Harry?
You said to me that Sybil Vane represented to you all the heroines of romance, that she was Desdemona one night, and Ophelia the other, and that if she died as Juliet, she came to life as Imogen.
She'll never come to life again now, muttered the lad, burying his face in his hands.
No, she'll never come to life. She's played her last part. But you must think of that lonely death in the tawdry dressing-room simply as a strange, lurid fragment from some Jacobean tragedy, as a wonderful scene from Webster or Ford or Cyril Tourneur. The girl never really lived, and so she never really died. To you, at least, she was always a dream, a phantom that flitted through Shakespeare's plays and left them lovelier for its presence, a reed through which Shakespeare's music sounded richer and more full of joy. The moment she touched actual life, she marred it, and it marred her, and so she passed away. Mourn for Ophelia if you like. Put ashes on your head because Cordelia was strangled. Cry out against heaven because the daughter of Brabantino died. But don't waste your tears over Sybil Vane. She was less real than they are.
There was a silence, and the evening darkened in the room. Noiselessly, and with silver feet, the shadows crept in from the garden. The colors faded wearily out of things. And after some time Dorian looked up. "You've explained me to myself, Harry," he murmured with something of a sigh of relief. "I felt all that all you've said, but somehow I was afraid of it, and I couldn't express it to myself. How well you know me. But we'll not talk again of what happened. It's been a marvelous experience, that's all. I wonder if life has still in store for me anything as marvelous."
Life has everything in store for you, Dorian. There's nothing that you, with your extraordinary good looks, will not be able to do.
But suppose, Harry, I become haggard and old and wrinkled, what then?
Then, my dear Dorian, my dear boy, you would have to fight for your victories, and as it is, they're brought to you. No, keep your good looks. We live in an age that reads too much to be wise, and thinks too much to be beautiful. We cannot spare you, and now you had better dress and drive down to the club. We're rather late as it is.
I think I shall join you at the opera, Harry. I feel too tired to eat anything. What's the number of your sister's box?
27, I believe. It's on the grand tier. You'll see her name on the door, but I'm sorry you won't come and dine.
I don't feel up to it, but I'm awfully obliged to you. For all that you've said to me, you're certainly my best friend. No one has ever understood me as you have.
We're only at the beginning of our friendship, Dorian,
answered Lord Henry, shaking him by the hand.
Goodbye. I shall see you before 9:30, I hope. Remember, Patty's singing.
As he closed the door behind him, Dorian touched the bell, and in a few minutes Victor appeared with the lamps and drew the blinds down. He waited impatiently for him to go. The man seemed to take an interminable time over everything. As soon as he had left, he rushed to the screen and drew it back. No, there was no further change in the picture. It had received the news of Sybil Vane's death before he had known of it himself. It was conscious of the events of life as they occurred. The vicious cruelty that marred the fine lines of his mouth had, no doubt, appeared at the very moment the girl had drank the poison, whatever it was. Or was it indifferent to results? Did it merely take cognizance of what passed within the soul? He wondered, and hoped that some day he would see the change taking place before his very eyes, shuddering as he hoped it. Poor Sybil! What a romance it all had been! She'd often mimicked death on the stage, and then death himself had touched her and taken her with him. How had she played that dreadful last scene? Had she cursed him as she died? No, she died for love of him, and love would always be a sacrament to him now. She had atoned for everything by the sacrifice she'd made of her life. He wouldn't think any more of what she'd made him go through on that horrible night at the theatre. When he thought of her, it would be as a wonderful tragic figure sent on to the world's stage to show the supreme reality of love. A wonderful tragic figure? Tears came to his eyes as he remembered her childlike look and winsome fanciful ways and shy, tremulous gaze. He brushed them hastily away and looked again at the picture. He felt that the time had really come for making his choice, or perhaps his choice had already been made. Yes, life had decided that for him. Life and his own infinite curiosity of it. In eternal youth, infinite passion for pleasures subtle and secret, wild joys and wilder sins. He was to have all these things. The portrait was to bear the burden of his shame, and that was all. A feeling of pain crept over him as he thought of the desecration that was in store for the fair face on the canvas. Once, in the boyish mockery of Narcissus, he'd kissed, or feigned to kiss, those painted lips that smiled so cruelly at him. Morning after morning he'd sat before the portrait, wondering at its beauty, almost enamored of it as it seemed to him at times. Was it to alter now with every mood to which he yielded? Was it to become a monstrous and loathsome thing, to be hidden away in a locked room, to be shut out from the sunlight that so often touched to brighter gold the waving wonder of its hair? The pity of it, the pity of it. For a moment he thought of praying that the horrible sympathy that existed between him and the picture might cease. It had changed in answer to a prayer. Perhaps in answer to a prayer it might remain unchanged. And yet, who that knew anything about life would surrender the chance of remaining always young, however fantastic that chance might be, or with what fateful consequences it might be fraught? Besides, was it really under his control? Had it indeed been prayer that had produced the substitution? Perhaps there might not be some curious scientific reason for it all? If thought could exercise its influence upon a living organism, might not thought exercise an influence upon dead and inorganic things? Nay, without thought or conscious desire, might not things external to ourselves vibrate in unison with our moods and passions, atom calling to atom in secret love or strange affinity? But the reason was of no importance. He would never again tempt by a prayer any terrible power. If the picture was to alter, it was to alter. That was all. Why inquire too closely into it? For there would be a real pleasure in watching it. He would be able to follow his mind into its secret places. This portrait would be to him the most magical of mirrors. As it had revealed to him his own body, so it would reveal to him his own soul. And when winter came upon it, he would be standing still. He would still be standing where spring trembles on the verge of summer. When the blood crept from its face and left behind a pallid mask of chalk with leaden eyes, he'd keep the clamour of boyhood. Not one blossom of his loveliness would ever fade, not one pulse of his life would ever weaken. Like the gods of the Greeks, he'd be strong and fleet and joyous. What did it matter what happened to the coloured image on the canvas? He'd be safe. That was everything. As he drew the screen back into its former place in front of the picture, he smiled and passed into his bedroom, where his valet was already waiting for him. An hour later, he was at the opera, and Lord Henry was leaning over his chair. Alright, folks. We're at a good stopping point because we are at another chapter. So we'll come back next week with chapter 9. Sorry the episode's a little short, but I got started a little late. Anyway, let's talk about what I do around here. Hi, I'm Glacier Nestor, but you already knew that because you're here. I do several things here on Twitch and YouTube. Twitch, Friday nights is when this stream is recorded. If you're listening to the VOD, feel free to drop in on Friday nights. It's always the Friday immediately following the last week's video. Obviously, because it goes up on Thursday. What else? Oh, I stream a variety of things on Wednesday evenings. Right now, we're currently in the process of improving this set of D&D dice I use for the D&D game that I participate in on Sundays. And that is almost my entire content set right there. That's everything I do on Twitch. And then all those VODs get posted to YouTube. Everything but the D&D gets posted to my channel. The D&D gets posted to a channel called Razzy's Planetarium. And then finally, my original piece of YouTube content is Frozen Tundra Finds, where I find a different game each week, and then I say what I found it to be, whether it was good, bad, or somewhere in between. And at the end of the season, you all say what you found each game to be, and you pick which one we play. I'm considering a little bit of a change to the Frozen Tundra Finds rules. Usually I would pick a game and play it, but I'm considering letting you all have the full gamut of the 15 games and just running stream VODs in the meanwhile. But that's, that's housekeeping things. Anyway, I digress a great deal. This has been Paper Cuts, and I hope it didn't sting.